So, yes, my presentation isn't about populism per se, but is very much about political parties and more specifically change within political parties. And I'll come to the links to the discussions in the two previous presentations a bit later, but to start with, it's obvious that in many European countries, both in Central and Eastern Europe and increasingly also Western Europe, populist parties have a lot share a lot of blame for the volatility and change within the political parties, party systems in recent decades. Also, I think we have interesting examples where we see change within political populist political parties, and populist parties evolve, adapt, morph, and overall contribute to party system change. So this is the presentation is based on a book manuscript that I'm currently working on called Party People, Electoral Candidates, Party Change, and Party System Evolution. I think the actual title will be slightly shorter. I'm pretty sure the marketing department will strike off a couple of words here. So part of the rationale for the whole project comes from a reaction to an earlier iteration of this research, or a paper that Philippe Koecker, my co-author for the Perspective book, and me put together, where we challenged the idea about parties only being old and new. We also suggested that parties also, some parties are also partially new. And in fact, all parties are in a constant state of change. Sometimes they change faster, sometimes more slowly, but it should be quite obvious that parties evolve over time. So we would like to challenge this anonymous quote insisting that parties are only either old or new. They cannot be old and new at the same time. So you can find some more papers. I won't be able to go through everything that we've done so far. So you feel free to visit the electoralcandidates.org website for more information. And I'd like to emphasize the word evolution here. Sometimes this evolution can be very sudden and radical. For example, when looking at the sudden breakthroughs of new political parties. At other times, it is slower, more evolutionary, if you like. But yes, our central notion is that parties always change, and we did see evidence of that in the two previous presentations by Dennis and Vasilis, most notably related to the Hungarian Fidesz party. Now, party change obviously has several different dimensions. There's no single notion of party change. You can't measure it with a tape and say that party change is this and that. You kind of have to operationalize it, but also party change comes in various different guises, or there are different dimensions to party change. So obviously we can talk about programmatic change that Dennis and Vasilis also were referring to. We can talk about leadership change that Jobbik experienced. We can also talk about organizational change. And organizational change here means parties, first of all, new parties being born, and also old parties kind of disappearing. But we can also talk about splinters, fission and fusion more in general, formation of electoral coalitions, and so on. But our main focus is on candidate change. We are proposing candidate change as a kind of proxy for the overall extent of party change, at the very least as a proxy for following parties over time, or party evolution over time. And in that sense, the electoral candidates are kind of like party genes. I don't mean the trousers, but I mean the genes within our cells. So obviously these, it's an open question to what extent the different dimensions of party change are related to candidate change and to each other. But there's a reasonably good, there are many good reasons to expect that we should see some correlations there. Even though I think the example of Fidesz stands out as an oddity of a party that has experienced extensive programmatic change, but with no leadership change and only limited organizational change. I can skip these bits here. I just wanted to highlight that party change obviously depends on certain other variables, and also party change can affect some other variables of interesting phenomena. So the aim of our book is to conceptualize and measure candidate change, and we interpret candidates party system change specifically in two ways. First of all, by looking at old, new, and partially new parties, and secondly, getting electoral volatility right. Electoral volatility being the most widely used measure, quantitative indicator of party system change. And we believe because researchers so far haven't paid enough attention to the evolution within and also between, oddly enough, political parties, the published indexes or published figures for the volatility index are often pretty misleading. Also, we study a relationship between candidate change and other forms of party change. There's a very clear relationship between candidate change and fission and fusion, or following the candidates actually helps us to spot instances of fission and fusion and distinguish between, more equal and unequal cases of fission, meaning parties coming together, merging, or electoral coalitions being formed, and fusion, meaning parties splitting or electoral coalitions breaking apart. The link between candidate change and other forms of party change is perhaps a bit less clear, but we have seen some relationship there between leadership change, meaning when party leadership changes, candidate change often follows or precedes it, as well as leadership change potentially leading to increased candidate change. Again, I think Fidesz is an exception there. Also, there is some evidence that candidate change is linked to programmatic change. I mean, the theoretical expectation here is obviously that if a party changes many of its candidates, I mean, candidates being the kind of a proxy for party elites here, then we should expect to see programmatic change, or at least the risk of programmatic change increases compared to a situation where most of the candidates carry over from one election to another. Also, if the party leadership, or the party leader, or the party experiences the leadership change and changes considerably programmatically, we expect that it can attract potentially new candidates, but also the party can become unpalatable to previous candidates. Also, we discovered something interesting in one of the working papers that is the basis for one of the book chapters. We discovered that changes in corruption perception are linked to candidate change. Again, you can visit the website for more detail. Now, the idea of party genes in the olden days, and there's an obvious link here to evolutionary biology and the evolution of the species. Now, in the olden days, when you wanted to compare species, like albatrosses, for example, you had to cut them up. Nowadays, evolutionary biologists take blood samples or maybe samples of DNA from the feathers, and then they compare the species. So actually, albatrosses that can look quite similar superficially and from a distance may actually be from different species. Likewise, political parties, when you look at them from a distance, and this is a slightly exaggerated example, but if you say look at the logos and you have nothing else to go by, you can actually put very different parties together. In the case of the Polish Law and Justice Party, well, that's another populist party. The changes of logo do not really relate in any meaningful way to the changes in the party overall. So obviously, this is a very very blunt and exaggerated example, but many authors, especially those working with from the cross-national perspective and comparing, dozens, if not dozens and dozens countries, often make the mistake of assuming that if the party name is a sort of clear indicator or clear sort of, if a party name remains the same, then it must be the same party. And alternatively, if there's a party with a new name, hey, this must be a new one. Actually, there's an interesting example from Denis's presentation. The Lithuanian Labour Party is a really odd party because one other potential sort of criterion for a new party being established is that it's a new legal entity. And most political scientists would probably agree that if a new legal entity is registered, then it must be a new party. Well, the Labour Party in Lithuania actually is, in terms of the legal entity, is much newer than the party actually is, because at one point it disbanded and recreated immediately because it wanted to get rid of some of the fines that it was charged for faulty bookkeeping or something. Dennis maybe can correct me if I got something wrong, but definitely there was a case of party dismantling itself and then immediately reforming under a slightly different name. I think they were called something like Labour. Never mind. So we draw inspiration from Richard Dawkins's book, The Selfish Gene, by now a very non-controversial book by an author who's now much more controversial than he used to be. The book, when it was first published 40 years ago or so, was quite controversial. And just in a nutshell, Dawkins's argument there was that in order to understand evolution, we shouldn't be looking at species, or species or organisms are not the drivers of evolution, but it's the genes. We should follow the genes because it's the genes aim at survival. Obviously not intentional, because genes do not think. That really drives evolution. And I believe parties are similar in that respect, because parties are really vehicles that serve some human interests, or are vehicles for human agency that populate them. So one way of sort of operationalizing these humans that are behind these parties is electoral candidates. Obviously, we could only look at leaders, but I think for many purposes, this would be too narrow, and the, you know, a leadership change can come about without significant change in the party elites overall, say if the leader dies or retires. So we are looking at candidates as party genes. Obviously, it's not the only conceivable, so to say, genetic marker within parties, but it's physical and visible and trackable. We could even go back in history, say the early 20th century, when we have the candidate lists for West European or East European parties. Then we can sort of trace the party evolution in much more detail than we would ever be able to uncover without actually spending, you know, years, if not decades or hundreds of years in archives. And even though I think the records would be perhaps not perfect. So ours is kind of big and thin data. We've created a data set of 200,000 electoral candidates that covers over 60 elections and 1,000 parties in 9 Central East European democracies since 1990. It's, to our knowledge, the largest country cross-country database on electoral candidates. Yeah, we're missing Romania because partly because in early 1990s, the Romanian Electoral Commission believed that not only were the ballot papers to be destroyed so that nobody could track them down later, but they also thought that, you know, we must destroy the lists of candidates. So I don't think they are available for some of the years. And Croatia is kind of hatched because it's a little bit complicated because it's our first attempt to use candidate data for these purposes, and we want to start with a range of more and less difficult cases. I believe the approach would work in Croatia as well, but it is a little bit too complicated perhaps for the very first attempt. So we want to develop the methodology more fully before we can go to Croatia. That's a bit challenging. So just to give you an example of how looking at candidates actually sheds light on party system evolution. This is the kind of evolutionary tree of Polish political parties. And this is based entirely on the level of candidate change within these parties and candidate movements from one party in one election to parties in another election. So you see lots of movement there, especially in 1990s and increasingly less and less. So far, the deep red parties stand for parties where most of the candidates were new, and the paler it gets, the yellower it gets, the less novelty the parties had in terms of the candidates. What is fascinating here is that we've created these trees for all of our 9 countries, and actually not only does it correspond to what we generally know about party evolution, but it also helps us to spot cases of, you know, important movements of candidates between parties, for example, constituting mergers or splits. But also sometimes what we find is a kind of quite common phenomenon in Eastern Europe, but it's never been mentioned in literature before, is collective defections, where parties do not split exactly, but a group of candidates or group of party elites moves together from one party to another. So this is it's not a discovery as such, because everybody working on Eastern Europe knows that, but it kind of, when you look at it from this bird's eye view perspective of you know, candidate data, it comes across so vividly, and erstwhile research using more quantitative approaches has really struggled, or doesn't say anything about that, because it doesn't register at all. So more broadly speaking, what we are suggesting is that we sometimes should study the micro in order to understand the macro. And here, by the micro, we mean the people within parties, and parties are the macro. Just following parties as organizations is not always insightful, because there might be a lot of change, or sometimes not that much change, going on under the surface. And this approach, I mean, it has been inspired by the genetic turn in evolutionary biology, but it could be also extended to the studies of any organizations where population data is available, and it could even be extended beyond people, perhaps. I've been thinking, I don't know enough about stock markets, but yeah, it would be interesting, perhaps. It might be possible to follow, for example, investment funds in terms of how the stocks are moving between them. But it's just completely blue sky thinking there. I think I'm running over time already a bit, but yes, I recommend you visit the website if you want to learn more. Let me just see whether I can. Yeah, I mean, just to give you this final table, when we look at the candidate novelty within parties that have been classified new in existing research, then we see that they actually come from it's a very diverse bunch of parties. Some such parties, like the new Latvian New Era party, or list of Miro Cerar in Slovenia, and the Bulgarian National Movement team. And the second were genuinely new. Almost all of the candidates that were new when it first contested its first election. However, we see in the red lines, we also see some parties that were not new at all, but were classified in some data underlying volatility indices as new. Particularly the last Lithuanian coalition here, that has absolutely no novelty, or almost no novelty, but has been classified as new in some volatility calculations. And, you know, if you add 20% or 21% to a volatility score, it can make a lot of difference. But most fascinating, perhaps, is the category in the middle of parties that were partially new, that had roughly 50% of old candidates and 50% of candidates who contested the previous election already. So they can't be classified as entirely new or entirely old either. Okay, I think it's a good time to finish. I could go on for hours, but I'm pretty sure I've exhausted my time allowance. Thank you.
Thank you.